watching the clouds. Adagio walked into her living room through the front door. She looked around at her tiny living room, observing the low possessions that were there. Being home was more depressing than being alone on that hill. Having to come home, a place that is usually safe and warm, and see nothing. Their home used to hold plenty of objects and decorations, but now most of the rooms were empty, save for some furniture. The ex-sirens had to sell their belongings in order to get extra money. Knowing that everything was gone, and knowing that she had to actually pay and work for food and living made her sick. If it wasn't for the rainbows and that sunset shimmer, she wouldn't be here, standing in her emptied apartment living room. Of course, if it wasn't for that same sunset shimmer, Adagio wouldn't be feeling as warm, and her loneliness was less perverted. The apartment was dark, and you would assume it to be abandoned if there wasn't faint giggling coming from an upstairs bedroom. Adagio grimaced at the sound. She removed her boots and made her way up the stairs. As she made her way down the dark hallway, she stopped in front of a door with a slit of light at the bottom of it. On the outside, muffled voices and giggling could be heard. Night after night, Adagio heard her friends' laughter and late-night talking, and she hated it. Of course, it wasn't their fault. She couldn't hate them for it. She felt that maybe she was too dramatic about it, but she couldn't erase her feelings. She stood at the door and almost considered going in there with them. Sunset Shimmer had mentioned earlier that evening that she wouldn't be where she was without her new friends. Maybe Adagio should try to become closer to her friends and strengthen the relationship between them. Her hand, now formed into a fist, lifted as she prepared to knock on the door. Just as her knuckles were about to impact the door, Arya shouted, "Jesus Christ, Sonata," and fell into a fit of laughter, following by Sonata joining in. It sounded like they were having a really nice time. Adagio pulled her hand back and decided against interrupting them. She fell onto her bed face first. She laid there and inhaled through the blankets, listening to the barely audible voices in her own breathing. Eventually, she rolled onto her back and stared into the darkness of her room. Her little talk with Sunset lifted her, but she was still far from standing. "Why did you have to go?" Her eyes closed and she inhaled through her nose and exhaled through her mouth, letting out an audible sigh. As much as she hated to admit it, and she really did, Adagio wished that they could have talked longer. Her eyes stung. Being alone was her least favorite thing. But here she was, once again, laying in her big bed, alone. The ex-siren grabbed a pillow and hugged it tight to her chest. Adagio awoke the next morning and leaned up to a sitting position. It wasn't bright outside, but the sun had already came out to make its appearance, only to be hidden away by clouds for the day. The messy-haired teen got out of bed and glanced at the digital clock hanging on her wall as she passed it. 8:47. The former siren gave an annoyed sigh and made her way down the hall. Sonata bumped into her as she left the bathroom. The blue siren was dressed and wide awake, which was odd. "Good morning, Daji," she greeted her messy-haired leader. Why are you up so early? Why are you up so early? Oh, Sonata gave her usual smile. Arya and I are going to the zoo today. It's free all day. Ah, Adagio said with disinterest. It wasn't like the two didn't invite Adagio. They did, but she turned it away. Like mentioned before, their company usually made her feel worse in some situations. They didn't consider themselves a couple, but they acted as one. Anyone would assume they were one. And Adagio was left to be the single. She just felt more lonely around them. Yeah, then we're going out for tacos, she said as she tried to contain her excitement. Do you want us to bring you anything back? I'll be fine, Adagio said as she walked past Sonata. Thanks for the offer. Her bubbly blue friend continued with her routine and went into her living room. Adagio made her way down the stairs and to the kitchen, only to be greeted by Arya sitting at the kitchen table. The purple teen was looking at the comic strip from the paper. Arya didn't look up from the paper, and she didn't pay any mind to her poofy-haired friend. Adagio opened the cabinet above the counter. It was empty. She wasn't sure what she expected. The three didn't have jobs, so why would they have food? It's empty, like always, the girl sitting at the table said, lacking emotion and not looking from her paper. Adagio closed the cabinet door and held in an irritated sigh before she turned to face her purple-haired friend. Oh, really? She asked, sarcastically, as she sat at the table. Don't give me that curse word, Adagio. The orange-haired teen let her friend's words go. She wasn't in the mood for an argument, and she didn't care enough to reply back anyways. The two sat in silence, and the only noise that could be heard was the crinkling of paper when Arya turned pages. Adagio watched Arya, and she studied her. She was wearing her usual clothes. She seemed to be all ready to go. And one thing was running through Adagio's mind. When are they leaving? It was a question that left her with mixed feelings. It was hard to say how she felt really, because she herself didn't know. She hated being alone, but she hated when they stayed home. Part of her wanted them to leave as soon as possible. The rest of her hoped something would happen and they stay home. Either option would leave her feeling alone. Arya sighed and closed her eyes. She put her paper down and opened her eyes to look at Adagio. What is it? The said teen was taken back slightly. She hadn't expected Arya to say anything, and she hardly noticed that she was staring. A smirk crossed Adagio's face as an idea danced through her mind. She rested her chin in the palm of her hand and put her elbow on the table to hold her head up. Love you, Ari. Arya's usual purple skin color turned to a shade of pink. It immediately darkened into a deep red. Shock replaced her usual grumpy facial expression, causing Adagio to giggle. No matter how she felt around them, she still loved making Aria flustered. It always made her feel better. The used-to-be purple girl slumped back into her chair, then held her paper up to hide her face. This action made Adagio giggle again, and only harder this time. "Sonata!" Aria shouted with tinted cheeks. "Come on, let's go." Sonata shouted back from upstairs, letting her know that she was coming. Aria stood from her chair and pushed it back in as Sonata came into the kitchen. "You're all flushed," Sonata pointed out to Aria with curiosity. "I know, now let's go," Aria said as she walked past her and out of the kitchen. Sonata looked over at Adagio, whose face held a proud smirk. "Are you sure you don't want to come with us?" The ex-siren's smirk faded. "I'm sure." "All right then, see you later, Daji," the blue teen said with a wave as she followed Aria out of the apartment. The front door closed, leaving silence throughout the apartment. Raspberry eyes glanced around the kitchen and thought, what could she do with her day? What could she do with her day? She figured her idiots would be gone all day, and she didn't want to sit around with her thoughts all day. Sunset crossed her mind, and she wondered what her flamed-haired acquaintance would be doing today. More than likely, she would be hanging out with the Rainbooms. What was she doing now, though? Was she sitting around alone, wondering how Adagio was and what she was doing? Doubtful. She turned her head to look out the window. So far, the sky was still painted dark and gray with clouds. Gloomy, dark days never helped with the former siren's depressed state, but staying home and inside was even less help. She stood from her chair and walked up to her room. Her room was still dimly lit. The former siren lied down in her bed and pulled her covers over her. Adagio figured she would get another hour or two of sleep and just try to speed the day up. A mass of orange hair covered the former siren's face when she woke a couple of hours later. She pushed her hair out of her face and moved from her bed to her closet. Her closet was empty aside from her new outfits. She had the outfits she wore to the Battle of the Bands, her everyday jumper with tights, and her sweatshirt and jeans, along with a few other items. Since the options weren't diverse, she didn't have a hard time choosing her jumper, shorts, and tights. Once she had gotten her clothes, she went to the bathroom to take a shower. She finished getting ready and headed out the door, locking it behind her. The former siren walked along the sidewalk and observed her surroundings. Not many people were out on this gloomy summer afternoon, making her walk quiet. Her mind wandered, but stayed on Sunset. She thought back to her and what she said the night before about escaping the noise. And here was no noise, only her own thoughts. It sounded dramatic and it made little sense, but it still meant a lot to the former siren. Adagio wanted the Rainbooms to know how she felt and how Sunset felt, but she didn't want Sunset to feel that way. not since she was the only one kind enough to reach out to the former siren. If she was with those rainbow freaks, she was having fun and laughing. The thought of the rainbows made Adagio sick, but the thought of Sunset laughing and her smile brought her a small smile of her own. Her eyes moved to the ground near a patch of bushes as she caught sight of part of the hidden trail that lead to the overlook. No one was out, so there probably wouldn't be anyone at the bench either. It was a quiet and gloomy day, and the orange girl had nothing to do. She pushed aside the bushes and walked down the trail. Since she had nowhere to be and no one to see, she figured she would visit briefly and then try to find something else to do. There was more noise on the trail, with the sound of rustling leaves and bird songs. It was nice, a lot nicer than being home. She rounded the last stretch of the trail and came to a halt. Her stomach flipped when she saw the red and yellow streak of hair of Sunset Shimmer. She was all by herself, and her back was turned to Adagio. But she could tell that she was staring up into the gray sky. Adagio was more nervous than she would admit, but she knew for sure that she was excited to see her flame-haired acquaintance once again. However, she wasn't sure that Sunset would be as glad to see her. It took some deciding before she composed herself enough to start walking towards the bench.